So, who really gets to define who you are? Is it the people watching you, the labels they stick on you, or is it something deeper, something biological that could finally set the record straight? Today, we're diving into the story of a personality type that seems to live right in the crosshairs of misunderstanding and how a brain scan might just be their ultimate vindication.
You know that feeling, right? You do something for reasons that make perfect sense to you, but the world looks at it and just writes a completely different story, a story that isn't yours. Now, what if that story followed you around, defining you in ways that just felt fundamentally wrong? Well, we're about to explore a type of person who lives that reality every single day, and the science that could finally let them tell their own story.
So, let's meet the main character of our story today, what psychiatrist Dr. Rami Kaminsky calls the outrovert. Now, this isn't about being an introvert or an extrovert, not really. An outrovert is more of a perpetual outsider. They're emotionally self-sufficient, and they tend to build their own worldview from scratch instead of just borrowing one. By their very nature, they stand apart.
And being an outsider, that comes with a pretty big problem. It means you're often at the mercy of how other people see your actions. And usually, they're looking through a very, very narrow lens. This is where all the trouble begins.
Here's the core of it. We judge people based on a single axis, what we can see. Their observable behavior becomes the only data point that matters. And for the autotrived, this kind of single-axis judgment is pretty much a recipe for being completely and totally misread.
And here's exactly how that disconnect happens. On one hand, you have what observers see, a preference for being alone, really structured routines, maybe a super deep focus on one or two interests. But the why behind it? Totally different. That solitude isn't about being antisocial. It's a need to escape groupthink. Those routines aren't about being rigid. They're about being authentic and efficient. And that deep focus, that's just pure, genuine passion.
This gap between the what and the why leads to something called observer betrayal. It's a powerful term. It's when an outrovert's deliberate choice for independence gets completely twisted and labeled as a social deficit, like there's something wrong with them. It's a betrayal because it takes their personal choices and uses them as evidence against them.
And this isn't just about hurt feelings. This kind of misreading can have really serious consequences. Those same behaviors, the routines, the intense focus, they can be mistakenly mapped right onto the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder. A structured weekend meal prep isn't seen as efficient. It's seen as cognitive rigidity, a hallmark of ASD.
So you can see how relying on behavior alone is a deeply flawed way to understand someone, right? It's like judging a book by its cover, but on a clinical level. It captures the what, but completely misses the why, which is where the real story is.
Let's be crystal clear about this. For the introvert, the problem isn't them.
It's the measurement. That single behavioral axis is just not good enough.
To get the real picture, to truly understand what's going on inside, we have to add another layer. We need a second axis of objective biological data.
And this is where things get really cool. This is where neuroscience steps in. An fMRI scan can provide that second axis. It doesn't just look at what you do, it looks at the brain activity that drives what you do. It can finally reveal the why.
Okay, so how would that work? Well, the idea is you could use an fMRI to run two key tests to tell the difference between an introvert's brain and an ASD profile. First, you'd test for cognitive flexibility. And second, and this one is fascinating, you'd test the observer effect.
Let's look at that first hypothesis. If you put someone with ASD through a cognitive flexibility test, you might see atypical activation in their brain's executive function networks. But the introvert? The hypothesis is that you'd see robust, strong, and efficient activation in those exact same areas. That would be literal biological proof of their flexibility, which flies right in the face of that cognitive rigidity label.
But honestly, that first test is just the warm-up. The most powerful, most compelling argument for this second axis comes from looking at how the male brain, specifically, responds to something super common, simply being watched.
See, for a male with ASD, being observed is often a huge stressor. It amps up anxiety and lights up threat centers in the brain, like the amygdala. But for the male introvert, the theory is it's the complete opposite. Being watched acts as a performance-enhancing catalyst. It triggers adaptive risk-taking, lighting up the brain's reward circuits, like the ventral striatum. So you have the exact same situation, but two totally different biological responses. One brain sees a threat, the other sees an opportunity.
And all of this brings us to the real climax of the story.
This is where the objective data from that brain scan can deliver a profound, deeply personal vindication and finally rewrite the wrong story that's been told about the Autobert for years.
But to really feel the full weight of this, we need to add one more piece to the puzzle: HSAM, or Highly Superior Autobiographical Memory. A lot of Autoverts have this, the ability to recall their life in stunningly vivid detail. Now think about that. It means they don't just feel misunderstood. They have a perfect, high-definition memory of every single time it happened.
So for the Autobert with SHAM, an fMRI isn't just some medical test. It's a tool of confrontation. It gives them the power to say, with objective, undeniable proof, your subjective judgment of my behavior is wrong. Let's look at the real data. My brain proves I'm exactly who I've been telling you I am all along.
This isn't just about correcting a simple mistake. For someone who remembers every slight, every mislabel, every single moment of observer betrayal, the fMRI becomes the ultimate tool of
Autobiographical and schema revenge. What a concept, right? Let's break it down. The fMRI provides irrefutable, biological proof that validates their entire life's experience, their autobiography. And at the same time, it forces everyone else to dismantle that flawed mental picture, the incorrect schema they had of them. It's the ultimate I told you so, and it's backed by neuroscience.
And this leaves us all with the pretty huge question, doesn't it? As technology gets better and better at peering into the biological wiring of our minds, what happens when that objective data tells a different story than the one society has written for us? When the scan conflicts with the stigma, which one gets the final say in defining who we really are?